This week in Idaho, the pride flag is now official in Boise after a legal move. Idaho AG secures convictions for 3 child predators, and Micron continues to expand in Idaho, but at what cost? Also, Bonners Ferry joins the fight versus Idaho's flag law. That and so much more. This is the Yokel Idaho Midweek Report, where we give you an overview of the news in Idaho for the last week. Welcome, glad to have you here with us. I hope you had a wonderful week. I most certainly did, especially with the amazing weather we've been having. I know up north you guys have been having some pretty amazing weather. Granted, down here in the Treasure Valley this last weekend, Saturday it got up to like 90 or something, which for us in the valley in May, that's pretty hot. We usually don't run into that until about June-ish. But thankfully, I actually got to enjoy the more northern part because I was up in Moscow visiting a friend, and I didn't have to deal with the heat quite as much, except for we drove down on Saturday. So the heat just kept getting hotter and hotter as we drove down. Thankfully, it got later and later in the day, so it wasn't too bad. But one thing I will say, though, is for anybody that may be listening, comment down below if you're from here. We went through Grangeville. Oh man, it is so pretty right now. All the big green fields and everything, and then you have these mountains around it. It almost reminds me in some ways, forgive me if I'm off on this, like Coeur d'Alene, where Coeur d'Alene is a lot more developed and it's in this bowl of mountains. Rather than Grangeville, it's not quite as developed. It's more agriculture based, but yet you still have those beautiful fields, beautiful mountains, that are all around it that are just gorgeous to see. Which, if you want me to go and capture some footage of that up there, please comment down below, because I wouldn't be against taking a little bit of a day drive to get some footage of it, because it was just that pretty. But I'd love to hear your words on that. Speaking of words, something I will say many of in this episode are stories. For the first half, like we teased, there will be a lot on flags, pride, and justice, particularly on the flags and pride part, but a good note to be said on justice. And for the middle part of the show, we have some stories related to law enforcement and the horrible wreck that happened last week. You may or may not have heard about it. And then to close out, we'll have a bit more of a fun political fact, so a little bit more upbeat to close us out, and news about Roaring Springs here in the valley opening up just in time for the warm weather. So stick with us here. We've got a lot of great stories, and speaking of which, starting with our head one here, in a move to continue flying the pride flag despite state restrictions, the Boise City Council voted 5-1, so 5 in favor, 1 against, on the 6th to designate it as an official city flag, the pride flag. This decision comes in direct response to House Bill 96, which you can go check out in our bill breakdowns if you want to know the exact text there, which passed earlier this year. It prohibits government entities from displaying unauthorized flags on public property. As for the resolution passed, it also designates the Donate Life flag as official and creates a legal workaround to comply with the law while continuing the city's decade-long practice of flying the pride flag. Mayor Lauren McLean defended the action, as she would, stating that the flag symbolizes Boise as, quote, a safe and welcoming city, end quote. As for council members on this that ultimately had to vote on it, those supporting the resolution gave emotional testimonies about inclusion and visibility. Council member Colin Nash noted that the hopes are that the flag shows people, quote, they are not alone, and, quote, choosing to live antithetical is something that we can do in the city of Boise. The lone dissenter, Councilwoman Lucille Willits, warned of potential financial consequences, predicting, quote, the legislature will slap a huge fine on the city of Boise, end quote, that taxpayers will ultimately have to bear. She expressed concerns that the action could lead to costly legal battles without opportunity for compromise. In conclusion, however, similar actions have been taken over in Salt Lake City. You may have seen it on Twitter or different publications talking about it, where officials also designated the pride and related flags as official to work around comparable state restrictions. Also, something we'll tease later here in Idaho, there will be some other ones that are similar to that, so Boise is not the only one. But speaking of sexuality, but in a less socially approved way and in a very encouraging thing for justice, Attorney General Raul Labrador announced prison sentences for 3 Idaho men convicted of sexual exploitation of children on April 28th. All 3 have received 10-year sentences for the possession of child sexual abuse material. Looking at the first one, Craig McFarland, 51, from Shoshone County, was sentenced for possessing over 200 files of child sexual abuse material and AI-generated abuse images, which On that, if you've kept it with the show, you'll know what that is, but this marks one of the first cases under Idaho's new law targeting AI-generated child abuse imagery. McFarland will be eligible for parole after 3 years. The second individual, Skylar Reed, 25, from Bannock County, was sentenced after admitting to downloading and sharing child exploitation material online. He will be eligible for parole after 2 years and a half. And then the last one, Seth Tanaka, 23, from Bonneville County, had his case placed under retained jurisdiction for 1 year, after which the judge will determine if he serves his full sentence or receives probation. The investigations were led by the Attorney General's Internal Crimes Against Children Unit, demonstrating Idaho's commitment to protecting children from all forms of exploitation. And then coming back to Boise, Micron's $15 billion semiconductor fab, under construction in Boise, represents the largest private investment in Idaho history. While scheduled to begin production in 2026 and create 2,000 direct jobs, questions have been raised about who actually benefits from this massive project. Particularly since 2008, Micron has enjoyed a property tax cap valuing their facilities at just $400 million, far below the actual value. Now, by creating a separate ownership entity for the new fab, they've secured another $400 million cap. This corporate tax strategy shifts the burden to homeowners who must make up the difference on taxes. But adding a little bit of context into this, founded here in 1978, Micron has transformed from a local success story into a multinational corporation receiving billions in government subsidies. But to pull this all together, during COVID, the company fired employees seeking religious exemptions from vaccine mandates, some people that I actually know. While bringing jobs and economic activity, this comes back to the core of it, Micron's actions raise an important question. Does a company receiving generous tax breaks and a $6.14 billion in federal funding still share Idaho's core values, where it was founded, or has corporate loyalty shifted entirely to shareholders and the bottom line? And speaking of Bonners Ferry that I hinted at earlier, a small Idaho town near the Canadian border, has found a creative way to continue flying the Canadian flag despite a new state law. As we talked about earlier, House Bill 96, which took effect in April, prohibits government entities from displaying flags other than official local, state, and federal flags on public property. While Bonners Ferry initially removed their Canadian flag to comply with the law, a little different than Boise there, the City Council recently passed a resolution designating every day of the year as a special occasion. This clever maneuver exploits an exemption law that allows international flags during special events, mainly if there would be some international person visiting. The city's actions mirror Boise's approach to keeping their pride flag flying, though not as divisive of a flag that they want to fly. Though Boise did take a different route by officially adopting the pride flag as a city symbol, unlike Bonners Ferry that's just having it for special occasions or continual special occasions. Both cities have effectively worked around state restrictions while technically staying within the legal boundaries, basically avoiding the letter of the law, but still breaking the spirit of the law. The flag law currently lacks enforcement mechanism, something that many are frustrated about, and lawmakers have indicated plans to implement penalties in next year's legislative session. For now, though, the Canadian flag continues to fly on Bonners Ferry in an American town in defiance of national unity and the spirit of House Bill 96. Hey there, hopefully you've enjoyed the midweek report so far on our first top stories. If so, do us a favor and hit the like button, and also consider subscribing and following so you can keep up on all this wonderful content on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter. Helps us stay connected with you and inform more Idahoans about our beautiful state. And speaking of something Idahoans love a lot, guns, in a show of support for Idaho veterans and gun rights, Senator Jim Risch and Mike Crapo have joined Congressman Russ Fulcher in backing legislation to protect veterans' Second Amendment rights. Both the Senate and House versions of the Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act would prevent the Department of Veteran Affairs from reporting veterans to background check systems simply because they have an appointed fiduciary, basically a middleman in financial proceedings, but not financial advice. Senator Risch emphasized that, quote, American veterans should not be penalized and stripped of their Second Amendment rights for receiving assistance managing their benefits from the VA, end quote. This legislation addresses a serious concern among veterans, many of whom may avoid seeking mental health treatment for fear of losing their firearm rights. Currently, Representative Mike Simpson remains the only member of Idaho's congressional delegation not co-sponsoring the measure. The bill specifically requires a judicial finding that a veteran poses a danger before restricting their gun rights, rather than using the mere presence of a financial helper as grounds for confiscation. This protection aims to ensure that those that defend our constitutional freedom don't lose theirs through administrative decisions rather than proper judicial process. And speaking of another tragedy and one involving people's lives, it struck last week in Idaho, Thursday evening, May 8th, when a tour van and pickup truck collided on Highway 20 near Henry's Lake State Park, just 6 miles west of Yellowstone. 7 people lost their lives in a fiery crash that occurred around 7:15 p.m. Idaho State Police reported that the driver of a Dodge Ram pickup, a 25-year-old from Texas, and 6 passengers from the Mercedes van perished in the accident. The van, operated by Sea Tour Holiday LLC, was carrying 14 tourists, including 12 Chinese nationals and 1 Italian, headed to the Yellowstone National Park. A Fairmont County Sheriff's deputy arrived shortly after the crash and, alongside bystanders, heroically rescued several injured passengers as the van caught fire. 3 were critically injured, were airlifted to a hospital in Bozeman and Idaho Falls, while others were transported by ambulance with less severe injuries. The highway remained closed for 7 hours as emergency crews worked at the scene. Investigations into the cause continues, as we should pray for all the families affected by this devastating loss. And staying with law enforcement and traveling a little bit back in time, the Valley County Prosecutor's Office has cleared officers involved in the August 2024, man, it feels like forever, shooting of Jeremy Bainbridge on I-84 on the ramp in Meridian. The incident began when Meridian police responded to reports of a fight, with Bainbridge fleeing and initiating a high-speed pursuit. You may roughly remember this. I was actually up in McCall when it happened. During the chase, Bainbridge called 911, telling dispatchers he was armed with a Glock 19 and wouldn't surrender, saying, quote, "Can you tell my family I love them, because I am not going to jail," end quote. After CUNA police executed a pit maneuver, Bainbridge exited his vehicle holding a firearm, leading 3 officers to discharge their weapons. Stray bullets ricocheted into the Roaring Springs Water Park, and 1 struck a passing vehicle, though providentially, no bystanders were injured. While Prosecutor Brian Noggle expressed some concerns about the execution being, quote, "poorly handled," end quote, he ultimately ruled that the officers' actions were legally justified. Bainbridge survived and later pled guilty to domestic violence and looting charges, receiving probation until 2032. His case reminds us of the difficult split-second decision our law enforcement officers face while protecting our communities. And going from the streets to the classroom, specifically in Boise, the Idaho State Board of Education has unanimously approved a 3.5% tuition increase for all 4 public universities beginning the fall of 2025. Full-time resident students will now pay $9,400 at the University of Idaho, $9,364 at Boise State, $8,914 at Idaho State, and $7,876 at Lewis Clark State. As for the reasoning for this, Board President Kurt Leibich cited inflation and funding for state-mandated employee raises as the necessity for the hike, while emphasizing Idaho's tuition remains among the nation's lowest. Meanwhile, alternative education options maintain more affordable rates, particularly with community colleges like the College of Western Idaho, charging just $139 per credit hour, while also vocational programs typically costing substantially less than university tuition. In conclusion, many trade certifications provide direct paths to well-paying careers without accumulating substantial debt. As university costs continue to rise annually, Idaho families may find greater value in exploring all post-secondary options based on career goals, return on investment, and their values. Hey, do you know someone that's going to be going to college shortly? Particularly with graduation season just around the window? Maybe you should share this episode with them so they can be informed about the rising costs that are happening with colleges and all the options that there may be. Plus, you can also share it for all the wonderful other Idaho stories so that other Idahoans can be informed and engaged about our wonderful state. And speaking of money, 23andMe's bankruptcy filing in March has left genetic data from 15 million customers in limbo, including many Idahoans. For those not familiar with the company, they collected DNA through saliva samples, is now seeking a buyer, raising concerns about who may access this deeply personal information. The Idaho Attorney General, Rao Labrador, has issued a consumer alert stating, quote, "There is nothing more personal than an individual's genetic information, and allowing that to be sold off to the highest bidder raises serious consumer protection concerns for privacy," end quote. A court-appointed overseer will now monitor data protection during bankruptcy proceedings, but Idahoans should take action. You can delete your data from logging into your 23andMe account, navigating to Settings and selecting 23andMe Data, and choosing Permanently Delete Data, and then you also should get a confirmation email that has actually happened. The Attorney General's office notes you can also use the Consumer Reporting app to request deletion of personal data from genetic testing companies. This situation also reminds us of the responsibility to safeguard what's most personal to us and to exercise wisdom regarding who has access to the very blueprint of our physical being, which is important there. And speaking of Russ Fulcher again and money, Idaho Representative Russ Fulcher, serving on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, is working to identify $880 billion in spending cuts while preserving Medicaid's original mission. Fulcher emphasized that Medicaid was designed specifically for, quote, disabled people, elderly people who truly need health care and don't have any other channel to get it, end quote. Fulcher argues that the program was never intended as a universal healthcare system, stating, quote, "If you're working age, able-bodied, I think there's a reasonable chance that's going to change." His proposed reforms include implementing work requirements for able-bodied recipients, with exemptions for those with disabilities, tribal members, and seniors/students. While some critics warn these changes could threaten healthcare access, particularly in rural areas where 1 in 5 residents depend on Medicaid, granted the question does become is how many of them are old, just saying on that, Fulcher maintains that his approach would protect the program for those who truly need it. The congressman also highlighted the potential savings outside of Medicaid, suggesting that ending electrical vehicle and green energy mandates could save over $100 billion. Though any enacted changes would require agreement between the House and Senate budget plans, so we'll have to wait to see if it actually happens. And speaking of the court again and our past, our state's notoriously convicted murderer, Lori Daybell, has filed a motion requesting a new trial in Arizona, just days after a jury found her guilty of conspiring to murder her 4th husband, something that we reported on last week if you regularly listen to the show. The filing, submitted May 1st, claims a juror improperly knew about her previous Idaho murder conviction. The 13-page motion cites juror misconduct, discovery violations, prosecutorial misconduct, and court impartiality concerns. Ms. Daybell represented herself during the Arizona trial, as we talked about, declining to call witnesses or present evidence in her defense. As many Idahoans will remember, Daybell was sentenced to life without parole in our state for the 2019 murders of her 2 children and for conspiring to kill Tammy Daybell. During closing arguments, she claimed her husband's death was, quote, a tragedy, end quote, rather than a crime, while prosecutors argued she plotted with her brother for financial gain. Her legal battles continue with another Arizona trial scheduled for June, where she faces charges of conspiracy to murder her niece's ex-husband. And coming back to the Treasure Valley, but actually heading a little bit west out of Ada County into Canyon County, in a surprising reversal, Caldwell City Council has approved a ranch development, a massive 1,019 home project that was previously denied in January. The 282-acre development receiving a 4 in favor, 2 against vote of approval, despite ongoing infrastructure concerns. Many residents have questioned whether Caldwell can handle such rapid growth, pointing to already strained water systems and congested roadways, not to mention the school system. While Public Work Director Rob McDonald insisted the city only uses 40% of its water capacity, locals report experiencing low pressure in their homes and wells drying up. The developer has committed, though, to building a new regional well and installing a traffic signal during the first phase of construction. They've also increased the minimum lot size, meaning they won't be a bunch of small packed together ones, and designated portions as age-restricted housing, so it won't affect the educational situation per se. The project joins other recent housing approvals as Caldwell continues expansion. As stewards of our community's resources, we should carefully monitor how these rapid developments affect our infrastructure, schools, and quality of life so we can properly guide and protect it. Hey there, if you've made it to this point in the Midweek Report, probably means you love learning about stuff with Idaho and enjoy our Midweek Report. So make sure to subscribe or follow us wherever you're listening to us, and go check out our Substack for more of our content covering all the wonderful things that happen here in Idaho. And then going over to Eastern Idaho and related to schools, two East Idaho school districts, Jefferson County and American Falls, recently faced crippling ransomware attacks that forced them to return to old school teaching methods. For weeks, educators operated without email, gradebooks, or internet access. In the 21st century, that is a bit scary. Quote, "It was the opposite of what we went through during COVID, when we suddenly couldn't be in person and went to technology," said Jefferson County Superintendent Chad Martin. Jefferson canceled classes for a day while teachers adapted, and both districts are now recovering by rebuilding systems and reformatting nearly 5,000 student devices. Fortunately, though, no sensitive student data was compromised, but moving forward, the districts are implementing stronger security measures, including more frequent password changes, off-site backups, and turning off computers nightly. In conclusion, American Falls did discover a little bit of a silver lining through all this, though. They enjoyed the technological break so much, they plan to implement an annual technology-free week, having already seen improved student engagement from the recent cell phone ban they have implemented before this and other things. And coming back to Boise and the legislature, more for a fun fact than any policy thing, Idaho's 2025 legislative session made history with a record-breaking 1,378 pieces of legislation prepared, the highest number in at least 30 years. Of these, 790 bills were officially introduced during the 89-day session that concluded on April 4th. This unprecedented legislative activity reflects a growing engagement with local politics across our state. Not per se a bad thing, let's just hope it doesn't divide us too much. The session addressed significant policy changes in education and taxes, as you know, with the income tax rate being dropped to 5.3% for 2025, down from the 5.695% last year, and substantially lower than the 7.4% rate in 2017. Key legislation also tackled issues ranging from business licenses to infrastructure funding and social issues, with notable bills including addressing medical ethics, parental choice in education, if you remember what we've talked about on that, and protections for religious liberty. The surge in legislative proposals demonstrates how conservative lawmakers are increasingly recognizing, or waking up, that their responsibility is to actively shape policy rather than remaining passive. This awakening has translated into concrete action, with 341 bills ultimately becoming law this year. As we look towards next year's session, this record-setting session signals a renewed commitment to advancing Idaho's values through engaged legislative leadership. And then a little bit of shocking before we close out on a wonderful note. A shocking case of public corruption has come to light in our state. Former New Plymouth City Clerk Danielle Painter has pled guilty to wire fraud after stealing nearly $200,000 from taxpayers. The 41-year-old Fruitland resident, who served as a clerk and treasurer for over a decade, used city credit cards for personal shopping, dining, travel, concerts, and even medical bills. To cover her tracks, she falsely labeled these expenses as professional services in the city's records. Over 6 years, her unauthorized spending totaled a staggering $196,947. Acting U.S. Attorney Justin Whatcott announced the guilty plea last Friday. Idaho State Police Lieutenant Jack Catlin highlighted the importance of safeguarding taxpayer money and maintaining public trust. Painter now faces serious consequences, with up to 20 years in prison and fines reaching $250,000 when sentenced August 5th. The case serves as a powerful reminder that those entrusted with public funds must be held to high standards of integrity. But ending on a happy note, our favorite local summer tradition here in the Valley has officially kicked off this past Saturday. as Roaring Springs Water Park opened for its 26th season amid near record temperatures. Interesting thing, though, it's one of the largest in the Pacific Northwest, but very perfect timing. With the thermostat hitting close to 90 degrees in the valley last Saturday, families across the valley couldn't wait to dive into some refreshing relief. The water park welcomed excited visitors from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., marking the unofficial start of summer here in the Treasure Valley. But for those who missed the opening weekend, don't worry. The park will operate weekends only until Memorial Day, when daily operations begin again. Also, the season brings an exciting new addition to the park, a massive movie screen above the water pool that will host dive-in movies during the Saturday slide nights starting June 21st. So mark your calendar if you love swimming and the movies, which is such a blessing to have here in the summer to swim and enjoy. And speaking of blessings, I hope this episode was a blessing for you. I have to head out here, but I sincerely thank you for listening to the entire report. I hope you found it enjoyable and valuable. If you like the midweek report, make sure to check out our other content. Also, if we missed any important points or provided incorrect information, please feel free to reach out to us via email or on Twitter by tweeting me at @LocalYokelIdaho. With the small team we have, we're not able to cover everything, but we do our best to cover the most interesting and important stories. Thank you for your continued support and assistance. That's all for now, and I wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Godspeed.